March 3, 1929, 4:47 a.m. The flames were visible from Michigan Avenue, orange and hungry, consuming Warehouse 12 at the Calumet Harbor docks. By the time the fire trucks arrived, there was nothing left to save, just ash, twisted metal, and the smell of burning whiskey. Inside that warehouse had been 500 cases of Canadian whiskey worth $200,000, Al Capone's whiskey, and the man who owned the warehouse, Thomas Dutch Henriksen, was supposed to be inside it. But here's what the newspaper... And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Papers didn't report what the Chicago police never figured out. Dutch Henriksen wasn't dead. He was on a train to Milwaukee with $50,000 in cash and a bullet hole in his shoulder. And the fire that destroyed Warehouse 12 wasn't an accident. It was a message. But not the message everyone thought. To understand what really happened that night, you need to understand Chicago in 1929. Prohibition had been law for 9 years, and Al Capone controlled the city's liquor trade like a vice grip. Beer, whiskey, wine. If it was illegal and profitable, Capone's organization touched it. His annual income was estimated at $100 million, more than some small countries, but all that liquor had to come from somewhere, and more importantly, it had to get into the city without the feds noticing. That's where the dock bosses came in. Chicago's waterfront was controlled by a dozen men who ran the shipping operations on Lake Michigan. These weren't gangsters. They were legitimate businessmen who managed warehouses, shipping manifests, and union labor. They had connections with customs agents, harbor patrol, and the few honest cops left in Chicago. If you wanted to move illegal cargo through Chicago's ports, you needed a dock boss in your pocket. Dutch Henriksen was one of the biggest. He controlled 3 warehouses at Calumet Harbor on the far south side, miles from the Loop, where Capone's men didn't constantly watch. Dutch was 52 years old, a Norwegian immigrant who'd worked the docks since he was 16. He'd built his business through hard work and smart partnerships. By 1929, his operation moved everything from steel to grain to lumber. And once a month, for the past 2 years, he'd moved Capone's Canadian whiskey. The arrangement was simple. A boat would arrive from Canada, officially carrying machine parts or textiles. Dutch would unload the cargo into Warehouse 12, where it would sit for exactly 48 hours while Dutch processed the paperwork. During those 48 hours, Capone's trucks would arrive in the middle of the night, load the real cargo, and disappear. Dutch got paid $5,000 per shipment. Everyone made money. Everyone was happy. Until February 28, 1929, when everything changed. That morning, Dutch received a visit from 2 men he'd never seen before. They arrived in a black Packard, wearing expensive suits and dead eyes. The older one, maybe 40, did the talking. His name was Vincent Moretti, and he worked for the Jenna brothers, a Sicilian gang that controlled Little Italy on the near west side. The Jennas had been Capone's allies once, running illegal alcohol operations and fighting their common enemies. But after Angelo Jenna was murdered in 1925 and Tony Jenna killed 2 weeks later, the family's power fractured. By 1929, the surviving Gennas were trying to rebuild, and that meant challenging Capone's monopoly. "Mr. Henriksen," Vincent said, sitting in Dutch's office without being invited, "we understand you handle special cargo for Mr. Capone." Dutch kept his face neutral. "I handle cargo for lots of people. Legitimate cargo." Vincent smiled. "Of course, legitimate, like the 500 cases of Canadian whiskey sitting in Warehouse 12 right now." Dutch's stomach dropped, but he didn't let it show. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Let me be clear," Vincent continued. "That shipment is worth $200,000. We're willing to pay you $25,000 to hold it for 1 extra week. Just 1 week. Tell Capone's people there's a customs delay. Tell them whatever you want. After 7 days, we'll come get the shipment ourselves. You walk away with 5 times your usual fee, and nobody needs to know you were involved." This was the moment that would define everything that followed. Dutch could have said yes. He could have taken the money, held the shipment, and let the Jennas steal from Capone. But Dutch Henriksen had survived 36 years on Chicago's docks by following one simple rule: never cross Al Capone. "Get out of my office," Dutch said quietly. Vincent's smile faded. "That's your answer?" That's my answer. Vincent stood slowly. You're making a mistake, Mr. Henriksen. A very expensive mistake. I'll take my chances. After they left, Dutch sat in his office for a long time, thinking. He'd just turned down 25,000, but more importantly, he'd just made enemies of the Jena organization. And the Jenas, even diminished, were still dangerous. They had soldiers, connections, and a reputation for violence that made even Capone's men nervous. Dutch, and if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Picked up his telephone and called a number he'd memorized but never written down. A voice answered on the third ring. Yeah? This is Dutch Henriksen. I need to speak with Mr. Capone. It's urgent. March 1st, 1929, 2 days before the fire. Dutch had never met Al Capone face to face. Their arrangement had always been handled through intermediaries, Capone's logistics men who scheduled shipments and delivered payments. But now, sitting in the back room of the Four Deuces Club on South Wabash Avenue, Dutch was about to meet the most powerful criminal in America. Capone entered the room like weather changes, sudden and impossible to ignore. He was 30 years old, thick-bodied, and immaculately dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than Dutch made in 3 months. His face was jovial, almost friendly, but his eyes were calculating every detail. Dutch Henriksen, Capone said, extending his hand. I've heard good things about you. Reliable, quiet, smart. They shook hands. Capone's grip was firm, but not aggressive. So what's this urgent business? Dutch explained the visit from Vincent Moretti, the offer to hold the shipment, his refusal. He expected Capone to be angry, maybe even grateful. Instead, Capone was silent for a long moment, thinking. The Jenas, Capone finally said, almost to himself. Those stubborn Sicilian bastards. I thought we had an understanding after their brothers got clipped. He looked at Dutch. You did the right thing telling me. But here's the problem. Now they know you won't play ball, which means they know you're loyal to me, and loyal men become targets. I can handle myself, Dutch said. I'm sure you can. But the Jenas don't play fair. They don't send warning shots. They send coffins. Capone lit a cigar, the smoke curling around his face. How much is in Warehouse 12 right now? 500 cases, about $200,000 worth. And Capone's men are scheduled to pick it up when? Tomorrow night, March 2nd. Capone nodded slowly. Here's what's going to happen. The Jenas are going to make a move on that warehouse. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. They're not going to wait for my trucks to show up, because then they'd have to fight my guys. No, they're going to hit the warehouse when it's vulnerable, take the shipment, and disappear. So what do? Dutch asked. Capone smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. We let them. Dutch stared at him. Excuse me? We let them hit the warehouse, but here's the twist. There's nothing in it worth taking. We move the real shipment tonight to a different location. Then, we fill Warehouse 12 with something that looks like whiskey crates but isn't. And when the Jenas break in and steal what they think is $200,000 worth of Canadian whiskey, they're actually stealing cases of colored water and wood alcohol that'll blind anyone who drinks it. Dutch saw where this was going. And when they try to sell it and people start going blind, their reputation is destroyed, Capone finished. Nobody buys from the Jenas anymore. Their distribution network collapses, their partners abandon them, and I don't have to fire a single shot. He paused. But there's a problem. What problem? You. The Jenas know you run that warehouse. When they hit it and find out it's a setup, they're going to come for you. They're going to think you set them up personally, which technically you did. Capone tapped ash from his cigar. So you need to disappear, just for a little while, until this blows over. Dutch's mind was racing. Disappear? He had a business, responsibilities, a life in Chicago. For how long? A month, maybe 2. I'll compensate you, of course, $50,000, and when you come back, we'll expand our arrangement, more shipments, better rates. Think of it as a paid vacation with a big bonus at the end. It wasn't really a choice, and both men knew it. Dutch had already chosen sides when he turned down the Jenas. Now, he just had to survive the consequences. All right, Dutch said. When do I leave? Tomorrow night, after the switch, but first we need to move the real shipment. That night, Dutch and 4 of Capone's men emptied Warehouse 12. 500 cases of genuine Canadian whiskey were loaded onto trucks and driven to a meatpacking plant Capone owned in Bridgeport. Then came the switch. Capone's men brought in cases that looked identical from the outside. Same labels, same weight, same markings. But inside were bottles filled with a mixture of water, caramel coloring, and wood alcohol purchased from industrial suppliers. Wood alcohol, or methanol, was legal to buy for industrial purposes. It looked like drinking alcohol. It smelled similar. But drinking even a small amount could cause blindness, organ failure, or death. By 3 a.m. on March the 2nd, Warehouse 12 was restocked with 500 cases of poison. To any observer, including the Jennas, it would look like Capone's shipment was sitting there, waiting to be moved. Dutch went home that morning feeling the weight of what was about to happen. The Jennas would steal the shipment, they'd try to sell it, and people would die. Maybe civilians who didn't know they were buying poisoned liquor, maybe Jenna distributors, maybe both. But Capone didn't seem concerned about collateral damage, and Dutch was too deep into this to back out now. The next day, March the 2nd, Dutch went about his normal business, managing his other warehouses, meeting with shipping clients, trying to act as if everything was normal. But he kept a gun in his coat pocket, and he watched every car that passed, every face that lingered too long. That evening, Capone's men came to Dutch's house. "Time to go, Mr. Henriksen. Train leaves at midnight. You'll be in Milwaukee by morning." "What about the warehouse? When are the Gennas going to hit it?" The lead man, a thick-necked enforcer named Jimmy Belcastro, smiled. "Already happening, got word. 20 minutes ago, 3 cars, 8 men. They cut the locks, loaded up the trucks, and drove off thinking they just scored the biggest payday of their lives." He laughed. "They're going to be real disappointed in about a week when their customers start dropping dead." Dutch felt sick, but said nothing. This was the world he'd chosen to operate in. This was the price of loyalty to Al Capone. "Let's go," Dutch said. They drove to Union Station in silence. Dutch carried a single suitcase with clothes and the $50,000 in cash Capone had provided. The money was supposed to make him feel better about abandoning his life, but it just felt heavy. As they approached the platform, Jimmy Belcastro grabbed Dutch's arm. "Almost forgot. Boss wants you to have something." He handed Dutch a newspaper. "Tomorrow's early edition. Thought you'd want to see." The headline was already printed. "Warehouse fire at Calumet Harbor. Dock boss missing, presumed dead." Dutch stared at the paper. "What is this?" "Insurance," Jimmy said. "Capone's idea. If the Jennas think you're dead, they stop looking for you. The warehouse burns down accidentally. You die in the fire. Very tragic. And in a month or two, when this all blows over, you come back to life. Turn out you were visiting family in Norway. Didn't know about the fire. Clean story, no questions." "You're going to burn down my warehouse?" "Already done. Happened about 20 minutes ago. Same time the Jennas were stealing the fake shipment. 2 birds, 1 match." Jimmy smiled. "Don't worry, insurance will cover it. And Capone will cover what insurance doesn't. You'll rebuild bigger and better." Dutch looked at the newspaper again. His warehouse was gone. His life, at least the one people knew, was gone. But he was alive, and he was $50,000 richer, and he wouldn't have the Jennas hunting him. The train whistle blew. "Better get moving," Jimmy said. "And Dutch, don't come back until we send word. Capone likes you. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. But if you screw this up, not even he can protect you from the Jennas." Dutch boarded the train. March 15th, 1929. 12 days after the fire. Dutch was living in a boarding house in Milwaukee under the name Thomas Hansen, keeping his head down and reading Chicago newspapers every day. The warehouse fire had made page 3, a small story about an accidental blaze, possibly caused by faulty electrical wiring. Dutch Henriksen, the warehouse owner, was missing and presumed dead. A brief, forgettable tragedy. But the real story was developing slowly, quietly, in ways the newspapers couldn't see yet. The poisoned whiskey the Jennas had stolen was starting to make its way through Chicago's speakeasies and blind pigs. And people were dying. The first reported death came on March 8th, 5 days after the theft. A man named Patrick Doyle, a regular at an unlicensed bar in Little Italy, went blind after drinking bootleg whiskey. He died 3 days later from organ failure. The newspapers called it another tragic case of bad liquor, common enough during Prohibition. Nobody connected it to the Jennas yet, but by March 12th, there were 7 more cases, all in the same neighborhood, all from the same batch of whiskey, traced back to distributors who worked with the Jenna organization. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story. Poison whiskey kills 8 in Little Italy. Sources point to Jenna Distribution Network. Dutch read the story in his boarding house room and felt the weight of what he'd helped orchestrate. 8 dead, maybe more to come. These weren't gangsters or criminals, mostly. They were working people who wanted a drink, who trusted their local bar, who had no idea they were drinking wood alcohol that would destroy their bodies from the inside. But worse was coming for the Jennas. In Chicago's underworld, reputation was currency. If you sold bad product, if you poisoned your customers, you were finished. And now the Jenna name was toxic. Speakeasy owners refused their shipments. Distributors canceled contracts. Even longtime partners started backing away, afraid of association. On March 14th, the Chicago police raided 3 Jenna warehouses in Little Italy, acting on anonymous tips that turned out to be remarkably accurate. They found cases of the poisoned whiskey, along with ledgers documenting distribution networks. Several Jenna soldiers were arrested. The organization was hemorrhaging money, men, and influence. Dutch knew who'd sent those anonymous tips to the police. Capone was tightening the noose, using the law itself as a weapon while keeping his own hands clean. It was brilliant and ruthless. That night, Dutch received a message at his boarding house. A telegram, unsigned. Coming home soon. Stay patient. But Dutch was done being patient. He'd been rotting in Milwaukee for almost 2 weeks while his life in Chicago existed in frozen suspension. He wanted answers. He wanted to know when he could return. Most of all, he wanted to know if this nightmare was finally ending. Against instructions, Dutch took a train back to Chicago on March 16th. He didn't go home. That would be too obvious. Instead, he went to the Four Deuces Club and asked to see Capone. The doorman recognized him, looked surprised to see him alive, and made a phone call. 20 minutes later, Dutch was in the same back room where this had all started. Capone wasn't happy. "I told you to stay in Milwaukee. I needed to know what's happening. The newspapers say 8 people are dead. The Jennas are falling apart. When can I come back?" Capone studied him for a long moment. "You feel guilty about the people who died, shouldn't I?" "Let me tell you something about guilt," Capone said, leaning back in his chair. "Those 8 people who died, they were going to drink illegal liquor anyway. They were breaking the law. They knew the risks. This whole prohibition thing, it's made criminals out of ordinary people, and some of them are going to die because of it. That's not on you. That's on the politicians who passed a law nobody wants. The Jennas stole the shipment because I told you about their offer. No, the Jennas stole the shipment because they're greedy and stupid. You did the smart thing. You stayed loyal, and loyalty has rewards." Capone opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. "Your warehouse insurance came through. $75,000 is more than enough to rebuild, plus the $50,000 I already gave you. You're looking at $125,000 payday for 2 weeks of hiding in Milwaukee. Not a bad deal." Dutch took the envelope, but didn't feel any better. "And the Jennas?" "Finished. Their organization is collapsing. Half their soldiers have switched sides or disappeared. The cops have their ledgers, so anyone who worked with them is compromised. And the bosses themselves?" Capone smiled. "Let's just say they won't be a problem much longer." Dutch understood what that meant. The Jennas were marked for death, probably already being hunted by Capone's men or their own former allies looking to curry favor. "So I can come back? Resume operations?" "Soon. Give it another week for the heat to die down completely. Then you come back, we announce you were visiting family, and we rebuild your dock operation. But bigger this time. I want to expand our shipping arrangements, double the volume, double the payments." "What about the Jennas' old territory? Who takes over their distribution?" Capone's smile widened. "You're thinking like a businessman. I like that. The Jennas' territory gets absorbed into my network. Their speakeasies, their breweries, their protection rackets, all of it. Little Italy becomes my territory completely. No more competition. And it happened without a gang war, without bodies piling up in the streets, without bringing too much heat from the feds. Dutch realized the full scope of what Capone had orchestrated. This wasn't just about protecting a single shipment. It was about eliminating a rival organization, absorbing their territory, and expanding his empire. And Dutch had been the catalyst, the unwitting trigger for the entire plan. "One more thing," Capone said. "When you rebuild Warehouse 12, I want you to expand. Build 2 more warehouses at Calumet. I'm going to need more storage capacity because business is about to boom. The Gennas controlled about 15% of Chicago's liquor trade. All that business is coming to me now. I need infrastructure to handle it." Dutch nodded, understanding his new role. He wasn't just a dock boss anymore. He was a key part of Capone's supply chain, a logistical partner in the largest bootlegging operation in American history. All right," Dutch said. "1 more week in Milwaukee, then I come back and we rebuild." "Exactly. And Dutch, don't feel guilty about those 8 people. Prohibition killed them, not you. You were just trying to survive. That's all any of us are doing." Dutch left the Four Deuces that night and took the train back to Milwaukee, but Capone's words didn't make him feel better. 8 people were dead because of decisions he'd made, because he'd chosen loyalty to Capone over neutrality. Maybe Capone was right that Prohibition itself was to blame, but Dutch had still pulled the trigger, metaphorically speaking. He spent the next week in Milwaukee, watching the newspapers document the final collapse of the Genna organization. On March 19th, Sam Genna, one of the surviving brothers, was found shot to death in his car on the near West Side. The killing was never solved. On March 21st, the Chicago Tribune reported that the remaining Genna operations had been absorbed by other organizations, which was newspaper code for Capone took everything. By March 23rd, Dutch received another telegram. "Time to come home. Welcome back. April 1st, 1929. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Dutch Henriksen returned to Chicago as a dead man resurrected. The story was simple and believable. He'd been visiting family in Bergen, Norway, when Warehouse 12 burned down. He only learned about the fire when he returned to America. Tragic, but these things happened. The Chicago newspapers ran small stories about his return. Dock boss thought dead, returns from Norway. No suspicion, no questions. The fire was ruled accidental, insurance paid out, and life moved on. But everything had changed. Dutch wasn't the same man who'd left Chicago 4 weeks earlier. He'd seen what real power looked like, not the kind that came from muscles or guns, but the kind that came from patience, strategy, and willingness to play a long game. Capone had destroyed an entire criminal organization without firing a shot, using misdirection and poison and Dutch's own warehouse as the weapon. Rebuilding started immediately. The insurance money, combined with Capone's investment, allowed Dutch to construct 3 new warehouses at Calumet Harbor. These weren't just bigger, they were more sophisticated, hidden compartments for sensitive cargo, multiple entry points for quick loading, reinforced security. Dutch was building infrastructure for a criminal empire, but he was building it to last. The first new shipment arrived on April 15th, double the previous size. 1,000 cases of Canadian whiskey worth $400,000. The operation ran smoothly. Capone's trucks arrived on schedule, loaded up, and disappeared into the night. Dutch got paid $10,000, double his old rate, but Dutch couldn't shake the guilt. Those 8 deaths haunted him. He'd see their names in old newspapers: Patrick Doyle, Antonio Rossi, Margaret O'Brien, and 5 others. Working people, poor people, people who just wanted a drink to forget their troubles. And they died because Dutch had made a choice. In May, Dutch did something he'd never done before. He started giving money away, not to charities or churches, that would draw attention, but quietly, anonymously, to the families of the people who'd died. He'd find out where they lived, learn their situations, and arrange for money to appear. A rent payment mysteriously covered, a job opportunity that materialized from nowhere, children's medical bills paid by an anonymous benefactor. It didn't bring anyone back. It didn't absolve him, but it was something. Meanwhile, Capone's empire continued expanding. With the Gennas gone, he controlled over 60% of Chicago's illegal liquor trade. His income soared to an estimated $6 million per month, and Dutch's 3 warehouses at Calumet Harbor became crucial infrastructure, handling hundreds of thousands of dollars in shipments every month. By summer, Dutch was wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined, but he was also trapped. He couldn't leave Capone's orbit now. He knew too much, handled too much product, had too much evidence in his head about how the operation worked. He was valuable, yes, but valuable prisoners were still prisoners. One night in June, Dutch sat in his new office at Warehouse 13 and thought about that moment in March when Vincent Moretti had offered him $25,000 to betray Capone. If he'd known then what he knew now, the deaths, the guilt, the permanent entanglement, would he have made a different choice? Probably not, because the alternative to working with Capone was working against him, and that road led to fire, or bullets, or Lake Michigan. Dutch had chosen survival, and survival in Chicago meant compromise. The story of Warehouse 12 became legend in Chicago's underworld. People knew the broad strokes: a fire, a missing dock boss, a Jenna operation that collapsed. But only a handful of people knew the real story, that Capone had orchestrated the entire thing, using a dock boss as bait and poison whiskey as the weapon. Dutch never talked about what really happened, not to his workers, not to other dock bosses, not to anyone. He carried it silently, the weight of 8 deaths and 1 warehouse fire, while his bank account grew and his warehouses processed more illegal cargo than anywhere else in Chicago. Years later, after Prohibition ended in 1933, after Capone went to prison for tax evasion, after the empire crumbled and the Chicago outfit evolved into something different, Dutch would sometimes drive past Calumet Harbor and look at Warehouse 13, the building that replaced the one that burned. He'd remember March 3rd, 1929, the flames visible from Michigan Avenue, the newspaper headline declaring him dead, the train to Milwaukee, and the telegram that said, "Stay patient." He'd remember thinking that he was just a dock boss caught in someone else's war, making survival decisions in impossible situations. But that wasn't quite true, was it? Because Dutch had made choices. He'd chosen loyalty to Capone. He'd chosen to help switch. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. It's the real whiskey for poison. He'd chosen to let the plan proceed even knowing people might die. Those weren't survival decisions. Those were calculations about whose survival mattered more. His own versus 8 strangers drinking bootleg whiskey in Little Italy. Thomas Dutch Henriksen continued running his warehouses until 1945, when he finally retired at 68 years old. He'd outlived Al Capone by 3 years. He'd survived Prohibition, the Depression, World War II, and his own moral compromises. He died in 1951, a wealthy man with a clean public record and secrets nobody would ever fully know. But sometimes, late at night, people who worked the docks would tell stories about a warehouse fire that wasn't quite accidental, about a dock boss who died and came back to life, about poison whiskey and a collapsing criminal empire, and how one man's loyalty changed the balance of power in Chicago. They didn't know the full truth. Nobody did. But they knew enough to understand that on the Chicago docks in 1929, there were no heroes, just survivors, casualties, and the people who built warehouses on top of both.